Is Valheim worth it? In this video, I'm gonna give you all the facts about this game so that you can decide for yourself whether or not this game is for you. Now, I have personally played this game almost 100 hours, and I've done extensive research as well to find out all the mechanics of the game. So by the end of this video, you will know exactly if the game is for you and if it's worth buying. So what is Valheim? Valheim is a survival RPG in a Viking setting. Your goal is to survive and defeat enemies and even bosses. If you enjoy other survival games and sandbox games like Minecraft, you will definitely enjoy this game. The world is massive and it's just there to explore, with plenty of different biomes and enemies. The base game is crafting gear, upgrading gear, making weapons and building bases to fight bigger bosses. The game has a linear progression, so you will explore each zone to the fullest before going to the next zone. So you will for instance start in the meadows, which is the lowest tier biomes. Here you will find weak enemies and it's easy and nice to explore while just learning the base game. And then later on you will get into other biomes like the Black Forest, Swamp, Ocean, Mountains and Plains. And every time you go to a new biome, you up the level of both your character and of course also the enemies. So you need to complete the first biome in order to unlock the resources needed to progress to the next biome. By this I mean that you will get resources like for instance a weapon or a new kind of metal that allows you to make new and better armor, and that will then allow you to do more damage and defeat tougher enemies. But this game is absolutely gorgeous, and the reason why it's so popular, especially when it first came out, is because it's a very polished game, especially for early access. The game is actually pretty complex, and there are some fairly advanced systems like the building system that you need to figure out by playing, but the game is simple to understand. If you ever played a survival game before, you will know exactly what to do when you start the game. So when you first start out in terms of early game, it is very simple. You're trying to find some kind of open plane where you can start building a base, and then you of course want to manage stuff like food and resources. So early game you will hunt deers, you will gather berries, very basic stuff, and then later on you will start planting and harvesting your own seeds to make better food that gives you more stats, which ties into the whole food system that we'll talk about in a minute here. Now while you're setting up this base camp, it is very important to keep in mind that enemies become stronger over time. The more you play, the more enemies will come, and once in a while you have these nights where enemies will storm your base. It's also very important to have a fortified base camp. If you're not ready for one of these sieges, you will be overrun in a second. Now one of the reasons I personally love this game is the visuals. The game looks absolutely fantastic. The atmosphere, the charm, the sun rays are amazing as well. So you definitely feel very immersed when you're playing the game. I found myself quite often just running across a field, just admiring how beautiful it is. And I don't normally do that in games, but that is just how beautiful this game is. It can also be very edgy and creepy, especially in the swamp biome. It's a very different feel to it. It's very dark and it just feels unsettling being in there. So it definitely nailed the atmosphere in this game. And the same can be said about the music and the sound design. The music is fantastic. It is nice and relaxed. It definitely feels like you're in a Viking aesthetics due to the music. Let's talk about some gameplay mechanics here. First of all, we have building. Now building is different in this game compared to most of the genre of games because it has physics. You can't just place blocks in midair and just let it hover. They need to have a foundation attached to the floor. If you for instance look at what I'm doing now, I'm building up a pole. The higher up I go from the ground without any supports, you can see the poles changing color. That is because they are now less supported, which means at some point if I keep going up, the entire thing will collapse and I can't build out from it. Now at first this will annoy you. If you're coming from other games, this will really annoy you that you can't just build how you want to, especially if you're constructing bigger buildings. This will feel really annoying, but I actually really enjoyed it. Once you learn the mechanics of adding support systems and pillars to it, it's actually a lot more immersive and realistic than what I'm used to from other games. I also like the fact that you unlock building items as you progress throughout the game. So the further into the game, you will unlock more details, more decorations, etc. So early game, you will start off with a very basic little wooden hut, and then later on you can start crafting big, massive mansions for you and your friends to enjoy. Let's talk about the food system. So Valheim has a very different and unique food systems to most games. For most games, you either have some kind of hunger bar and you fill it up and then you are good, or whenever you take damage, you then eat food and it regenerates health. Valheim, however, has a system where food buffs you. You could have the most crazy gear and weapons. If you don't have good food, you will have terrible health and stamina, so you can't run around, you can't fight stuff. You need the correct food to buff you. And then later on, this food will give you, for instance, plus 30 in stamina and plus 15 health, which is a lot. And these buffs can last anywhere between a few minutes to up to 20 minutes as well. Now, I actually really enjoyed this aspect. It added another layer of progression and complexity that I liked, but I was also playing with 2 other players. I could imagine if you're playing solo that this might be an issue, because you have to gather everything yourself and also craft high expensive foods. But all in all, I really enjoyed this food system being very unique to all the games. The next system is the fight system. This also ties into skill points. If you see now, you have skill points in different aspects. So you could, for instance, have in melee, in sneak attacks, bows, wood chopping. So the more you repeat the same action, the better you become at it. So for instance, if you're playing with a few friends, it could be a good idea to have someone designated, for instance, to chopping wood, because they would then have a high skill in that. And then someone else could be the hunter, because they would have a high skill in bow, and so on and so on. Now these are going to be quite difficult to fill out, and they take a long time. The stat you're seeing here is basically with 100 hours of playing, and I'm not even close to being maxed out in anything. So you can definitely get hundreds of hours worth of playtime just trying to max out your skills alone. And this ties into the fighting system as well. The fight system has attack, block, and sneak, for instance. So if you can sneak up behind an enemy, you can get a critical blow that will then deal more damage. You can also get a headshot with a bow that also works. So it's going to be a real struggle trying to sneak up on an enemy if you have 0 skills in sneak. And the same thing can be applied if you suddenly swap out your weapon. If you've been running around an axe all game and suddenly change to a sword, you can have terrible damage with that sword until you get your skills up with that as well. And just like any survival game, you of course also have crafting. As you progress throughout the game and you kill monsters and you find different resources, you can unlock more stuff. So early game you will start off with something like a wooden axe, and then later on you can start making metal axes, etc. And of course these are better for gathering resources and deal more damage. And the same thing applies to armor, of course. So the game has a nice and linear progression system. You progress through each different biomes that give you a new kind of resource and different enemies to kill. And they also have a different boss that also have different attacks, and you need to defeat the previous boss to unlock the next one. Now the game can be quite grindy, especially with some of the resources like gathering iron. This can take forever to mine up, and it costs a lot to craft stuff. So if you, for instance, died while sailing, you lost all your items, that would take maybe an hour or so to get back in terms of all the items you lost. So the grind can definitely be quite punishing, especially as a solo player. Now Valheim has several biomes. You have the meadows, black forest, swamp, ocean, mountains, and plains. And these all contain a different level of enemies, and also increased and better loot for each zone you go through. But the world is beautiful, and it's a very nice world to just explore. And moving on to exploration, you also have the ocean. It's another biome by itself. You have terrifying monsters such as the Leviathan or serpents that will attack you while you're on your boat. So be very careful while you're exploring the ocean here. Now for me, the game feels very immersive, and I fell in love with it straight away. As soon as I saw that you could chop down trees, and the gravity of those trees would make them fall into other trees, and you can have a domino effect of chopping down one tree, and that would then take down 100 trees underneath it if you're standing on a mountain. That one did it for me. That was so much fun. The game definitely has a ton of value in the fact it is very replayable. It is an open world. You can do whatever you want to. You can easily stack up hundreds of hours of this game. Now there are of course some issues. For instance, I was playing with my 2 friends, and I would often crash while doing certain things. So for instance, while harvesting crops, I would constantly crash my game, and there was no way to fix it. But overall, the game runs really smooth, no FPS issues whatsoever, so great performance in general. Another issue is sometimes there can be some weird hitbox mechanics. So you would stand there with your bow, have a perfect shot lined up, and it just would go right through the guy. Or you would stand next to him with your sword, hit him, and nothing happens. You just dodge it somehow. There are some weird things in there, but it's very rare that happens. And probably the thing that annoys me the most is the resource cost of some items. Like for instance, some weapons or armor cost way too many materials to actually craft it. So it can take you half an hour or even an hour to get that material. Especially when it comes to the more advanced and rare elements like iron. They can take a long time to find, and then suddenly you realize you spent an hour gathering it just to make one item. Now let's talk about multiplayer. This is where the game shines. You can have a good time playing this game by yourself, but it is of course way better with friends. I played with 2 other friends, and of course it's just way more fun, and you can also divert different tasks to each people. So I was, for instance, the builder or the crafter, while the other ones were fighters, hunters, etc. Which helps a lot in terms of the workload, because you get different materials all the time compared to just playing solo. And of course you control your friends by dropping trees on them. I didn't run into any issues in terms of multiplayer. It ran smoothly all the time. There were no weird DCs or bugs with that, and it's just done through the game, so very well done. Now the updates are pretty slow to come out, but for a game that has 5 developers, early access game with no pin to win system, this game is great. I foresee this game blowing up again when the full release is out. So in conclusion, this game is absolutely worth buying. The gameplay is fantastic, the visuals, the atmosphere, the game mechanics are different, but it's done in a really interesting and good way. So for a game that costs less than 20 bucks, take up less than 1 gigabyte of space, this game has brought me a ton of fun, and I think you will also really enjoy it. If you found this video useful, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and also check out the video on the screen now, as I think you also really enjoy that one. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next one. Peace out.